I'm often asked, why did I start Tipping Point Recovery? How did I get into this field? And how and why did I start my business? So I got into this field because of my own addiction. I started my business because of what I witnessed. So, two different reasons. I got into this field because of my own addiction, my own pain, and I started this business because of what I witnessed. Now, it was what I witnessed both when I was struggling. So, what I was witnessing, not really paying attention to, but in hindsight, after I got sober, I looked back on and could see what I witnessed when I was drinking, and in particular, what I witnessed when I got sober. So, those are the two parts to this. My own addiction took me to such a dark place, and I didn't know what was happening. So, while it was happening, like when you go to the bottom and then you climb out, at least for me, and I think it's really common. Like I had no other choice but to start to help other people, or no other desire. I felt like I had no other choice. It just felt like, well, this is what you do next. Because what the hell was that? I was so shocked and stunned by what happened to me and who I became that I said, I have to help other people find this solution. I have to help other people get this, especially when I learned how many people struggle. Like when I was struggling, I didn't know how many people struggle. Like millions of people struggle on a daily basis with addiction, drug and alcohol. I don't know, they say 30 million or something. You add on all the other things we can be addicted to and process addictions. I mean, it's three times that probably. And never mind the fact that today we're addicted to technology and our phones and distraction and avoiding. So if you really widen the definition, I mean, it's a lot of people. A lot of people are struggling with addiction. And what I thought about addiction prior to becoming an addict was not what I experienced. Well, it was what I experienced. What I thought about addiction prior to becoming addicted was you were just shit. You were bad. You were a loser. You were worthless. I mean, does anybody else want to raise their hand and admit with me that that's what I thought? That's what I used to think. What did you used to think? That's what I thought an alcoholic or an addict was. Like a low life until it happened to me. But actually, when it started to happen to me, I just associated with, then I'm that. Then I'm a low life. So I got into this field because of my own addiction. I started the business because of what I witnessed. And the story to starting the business, how I landed on what I do today, I find fascinating. It's what drives me every single day, and there's many components to it. So when I got sober, I was told, don't start a business, even though I'd always had a business. You, Joe, huh? Even though I'd always had my own business, I had a nonprofit nursery school. I was the founder of a nonprofit in my early 20s. Then I started a summer camp on a farm with riding lessons for 5 years. When I was married, we bought a farm. I had this beautiful Littlefield farm in Massachusetts. You can look that up. Evergreen Day School is still there today in Cambridge, Mass. I started that program in my 20s from scratch. And then I started a kind of a life coaching. I was doing motivational speaking and working in the field of or education, which is where I had really done most of my work. And so it was natural for me to start things. And it was told to me when I got sober, don't start a business. Nothing can come before your recovery. And when you're an entrepreneur, you start things. And so I remember thinking, well, what am I supposed to do? And it was suggested to me to get a get well job. I was pretty sick in my addiction. And so I had tried multiple times. I have a different definition on that today, but I had gotten started several times in my recovery. And when it was told to me to get a get well job, I took it seriously. Finally, I didn't for a couple of years, but finally I did. And I got a job in a bagel shop. And I just worked. And the desire, though, to work in the field of addiction was super strong. And it was suggested to me that I could get an entry level job in the field of addiction. So I did. I got an entry level job. I wasn't going to start my own business because I took that advice really seriously. Like if I had started something, it would have, it could have taken my attention, my time, my energy, my focus, which might not have been recovery first. And it was my belief and what I was taught that my recovery had to come first because that meant my life. Everything else had to come after that. So I didn't start a business. And I literally, I remember one day saying, well, what am I supposed to do? And the message I heard was just help people. So I did. I got a job and a job and a job. I had several jobs in the first 5 years of my recovery. What I what happened in those first few years of recovery is I saw this massive discrepancy between what I thought I was back when I was drinking and what I saw being what I saw as the way we treat people with addiction today and what my family thought. So just picture these three things happening, right? Who I became and who I thought I was, which was a piece of crap in my addiction. How we're treating people to get better in the systems. I mean, ER, detox, rehab, sober house, all those systems that work somewhat together. And then what my family thought. And what my family thought was limited to how I was treating them. Because we didn't have any knowledge outside of my experience as an alcoholic. So what my family thought was, she's a jerk. She lies, right? Just like I did. And so if we all thought I was not a good person, we weren't fostering recovery. My family was not fostering recovery. I wasn't fostering recovery. I wasn't around recovery, which is what I believe needs to happen for recovery to foster. It can't come from within, or it doesn't usually come from within a person. It usually gets influenced by the outside. When we go to treatment and we hang around all these other people, and we go to meetings and we hang around all these other people that are further along than us, it can light us up on the inside. But when you're hanging around bars and you're hanging around people that are mad at you, that's what festers, is more of that less than kind of thinking. So there was this massive discrepancy between what I thought about addiction, what I was learning about addiction, and the way we were treating it, and what my family thought. I mean, I did horrible things. Unthinkable, actually. I said unthinkable things. If I listed them out to you, I think you'd go like that. And to the people I loved the most. So naturally, I felt a certain way and they felt a certain way as a result, right? And the feelings I had about myself and the feelings they had about me prevented us both. It prevented me from having any fight in me. When you think that of yourself that low, the fight to live is just hardly, you can't grasp it. And my family, the feelings they had about what I was doing, they weren't fighting for me. They were mad at me. They were hurt by me. They were confused. So that just is a little background. So then I'm getting sober and I say, I want to work in the field. Don't start a business is what was told to me. Get a get well job. So I did. And I only had that bagel job for 6 months or so. And I started working right in the field. I just was dying to be with people. And I had really pretty good recovery early on. That first 6 months, I was on a beautiful pink cloud, had gone through the 12 steps, and like entire life was changing. And I wanted to share that. Was it too early to work in the field for me? Very possibly. Very possibly. But those are stories for another time. I made it through, but it can be too much. It could have been too much for me. There were a couple of close calls where working in the field was a little too soon. But what I learned when I finally started to recover in a serious way didn't match up with what I thought about addiction. As I said, I thought I had a thinking problem, not a drinking problem. I heard alcohol wasn't my problem, and I had thought it was. I heard I had a hijacked brain. I heard that I had a broken brain. I heard that I had a broken pathway between the midbrain that is addicted and the rational thinking brain. Like I was told by a PhD psychiatrist, there's a broken pathway, meaning when I was drinking one drink, the rational decision making was shut off. My experience was that people didn't know that. My doctor didn't know it. It certainly wasn't being presented to me that I had a broken brain. It was when I started to recover. So I had these two parts to myself. Remember, right? In my early recovery, I just wanted to work in the field, no business. So I had the nasty experience of addiction, and I had the early recovery learnings. Big gap between those. And now I'm working in the field. And by the way, I am an entrepreneur. And what an entrepreneur means to me is I'm a creator. I create things. So you can't take that out of me. It's my personality. So here I am showing up with these feelings of what it used to be like. I'm trying to create visuals because I can see this in my head. I'm trying to create visuals for you guys. Because this to me, I'm looking at this from a high level now, right? I'm not in these moments. I'm looking at this from a high level. And I had this pain and mess from my addiction. Then I was taught what it really was, which wasn't what I was told, or my family. So big gap. And now I'm showing up for people in the field and watching how these individual siloed systems were operating. And people still weren't describing it as a broken brain, broken pathways, no access to prefrontal cortex, inability to make decisions. It wasn't being described in that way. And I was hearing the narrative in the treatment centers. She has to want it. There's nothing you can do, family. I was hearing those narratives. And I was struggling with that. Didn't have any way to articulate that it was bothering me, but I just remember feeling like I just landed on a foreign planet. Because I remember thinking something's not making sense as I was walking around these experiences. And in my early recovery, I was like, something's not making sense. People were showing up to detox where I worked, feeling like a piece of shit. And they were actually treated in some ways like a piece of shit. Not completely, but they weren't being treated like the beautiful soul that they are, that we now know they are. Yeah, they were treated kind of rough. And I was also hearing the narrative. Family wasn't even anywhere near the treatment centers that I worked in. They weren't part of the education. They weren't at the table. They weren't being educated. They might get a release of information signed, but those often got pulled by the patients because patients can do that. Say, yeah, you can talk to my spouse or my parent, but then when the addiction starts getting nasty in her head, we pull that release. So I saw the system just reacting, like someone would sign a release of information, then they'd pull it and they go, oh, he pulled the release. You can't talk to her. It was just this acceptance of the way things were. And I had unrest about that in me. Again, not knowing that I would ever do anything with it, but just felt, if something felt wrong. Is this making sense? Tell me what you think. My family also heard there was nothing they could do. And so my addiction when I was struggling got worse. Nothing happened. Fortunately, I paid attention and I was quiet and still enough when I first got sober. And I said, what do I do? And I heard, just help others. So that's what I did. And how and why tipping point recovery started after these jobs really is a separate story from that early passion to wanting to help others. And that's what I want to focus my time in this story for you now. What I didn't know in those 5 years that I worked as a case manager, as a recovery coach, as a peer specialist, ultimately became a trainer of recovery coaches. What I didn't know in those first 5 years is that there was a path that would be revealed to me in these first 5 years of sobriety. There were actually 5 distinctive moments in that 5-year period that led to the tipping point. the creation of Tipping Point. Now remember, when I'm in these 5 years of working in the field, I am not going to have my own business. I thought maybe one day I'll have my own business again because I'd always had it, as I said, but it was absolutely not going to be in the field of addiction. And here I am with a company that's 7 years old called Tipping Point Recovery in Addiction. So how'd that happen? So here are the 5 paths that were being revealed. It didn't all become clear to me until the end of these paths being revealed over a period of a few years. The first one was the path that happened back when I was drinking, and I looked at my children square in their eyes and I said, I'm not drinking. And I was. And they didn't believe me, but they wanted to believe me, and they tried to believe me, but I broke them. And I broke our relationships as a result of that. And I remember this one particular day, I talk about it as the kitchen table story, and I remember distinctively looking at their faces, lying, and having a conversation in the back of my mind going, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you lying? Like, and then hearing, who are they to talk to me that way? You know, sort of, you think of the angel and the devil on your shoulders. It was literally like my higher self and my lower self, or my addicted self and my recovery self. But I remember clear as day having this feeling of I'm doing it, not wanting to, but not stopping myself, and no one was stopping me, and wondering why. So that was the first one. And there's a bunch of stories, but really the thread, the pathway that was being opened up was I'm not drinking when I really was. And the second one was, and many of you have heard this, but I'll tell the story briefly for those that haven't, and I call it Amanda's story, and it was really a really major seed that got planted that gave me a lot of unrest. And it was a girl that was in detox where I was working as a case manager. She was there 7 days. She ultimately decided she wanted to go on to further treatment. She had been in and out of treatment a whole bunch of times, and I found her a bed, which was hard to find. And she accepted the bed on this one particular day, and I left. I went home, came back to work the next day, and she said, I'm not going. My mother said I can come home. And I was like, that feeling of that I almost had her to go. I just needed to get her there, and then the team there would continue to work with her to want it and stay, feed the want. And she wasn't having any part of it. She had completely let go of any surrender she had to her illness. And I was in the elevator coming back from lunch and saw a woman crying, and I asked her, what's wrong? And she said, I have to pick my daughter up, and I didn't want to. I wanted her to go to further treatment, but there are no beds. And she didn't know I was her daughter's case manager. And I looked at her and I said, oh, what's your daughter's name? And she said, Amanda. Now, I knew enough to know I wasn't supposed to talk about Amanda to this mom, but I really remember, like, as if it was right now, having this feeling of like, oh, we have a problem, and my boss is going to tell me what to do about it. I was fairly new in the job. I was probably 6 months in the job. And, you know, when you're first starting a job and you're new, you go to your supervisor or a peer and you're like, oh, how do we handle this situation? How do we handle this situation? And they train you. So I literally naively got off that elevator, and I was like, oh, I have a problem. My boss is going to tell me what to do about it. I really thought she was going to say, oh, in that case, this is what we do. Because I'm like, I have a bed for Amanda. And she said no, because she said her mother was going to let her home, but her mother doesn't want to let her home. Her mother said, there's no bed. I'm like, what do we do? And the boss's words made me shudder, because she said, you can't tell that mother the truth. And I remember thinking, because of the Privacy Act that is intended to protect Amanda from sharing any medical advice with people about her disease, that's why I couldn't tell that mother the truth. So I remember thinking, and that applies here, because Who is that policy protecting in that moment? Drop it in the comments here. Who is that protecting? Is it protecting Amanda? It's protecting Amanda if she's at choice in her addiction. It's protecting Amanda if she doesn't have a lying, denying, justifying disease. But in my opinion, the only person or place or thing it was protecting is the disease. Let's just keep it quiet. Let's just keep it under the rug. That's what addiction's saying. Let's just keep it on the down low, in the dark. Let's not tell anyone. And so all I did was get mad and frustrated and complain. And I know you guys can relate. I mean, how many of you have been living for years just complaining about the system? And we just say it. We just say it as if it's acceptable. We just say, oh, the system's broken. But at this moment when I stood there and the boss said that to me, I remember thinking, that's really broken. And what are you going to do about it? Like, why isn't anyone trying to fix it? And then I went on for the next couple of years in more jobs in this field, showing up, helping people, just doing what wasn't working over and over and over and over. And I remember in my emergency room job having this one day where I said, oh, I get it. And I mean no disrespect to anyone who's in these jobs at all. But I remember one day going, you all go to work every day and you do the same thing despite it not working. And then you go home and you lay down and go to sleep and you get up and you put your clothes on and you have breakfast and you go back to work and you do the same thing. And I hit a wall in my 4th or 5th year of recovery. I'm not remembering exactly, where I was like, well, I'm not built for this. Because that's what it felt like. I was banging my head against the wall. It felt like addiction. The system felt like addiction, doing the same thing over and over despite negative consequences. And even though I had no intention, even at that point, of starting a company in the field, this is the background that I wanted to give you. The background was the kitchen table. I'm not drinking when I was. Amanda's story. You can't tell that mother the truth. And then I land in the job that changed it all. And it was, I was on call with a police department, which meant that anytime someone had a non-fatal overdose in this town in Massachusetts, they would call me. And it was every day. Back in 2015 and 2016, every single day they would call my phone and they'd say, John Smith, 27 years old, 4 doses of Narcan. He's on his way to the ER now. And I never left the area. My job requirement was to stay within 10 to 20 minutes of the hospital so I could get there. And best job I ever had. Best job I ever had because of what happened in that job. And as I was working in this job, several things happened. They were paths that were being revealed to me. First one was when the chief of physicians asked me to come to doctor's rounds. And if I remember correctly, her words were, will you come to doctor's rounds tomorrow morning to teach us about addiction? And when I heard that, I remember thinking, you don't know about addiction? I thought you learned about addiction. I would assume you'd learn about addiction in medical school. And what I realized, without lived experience, so it wasn't shade on the doctors. I just was naive. I really thought my doctor knew what addiction was, but we don't. And they wanted me to come share my story because I was changing things up in the ER in that job. And that was a pivotal moment. I'll never forget these phrases. I'm not drinking. You can't tell that mother the truth. Will you come to doctor's rounds? That was the third message. The fourth message was the company that was overseeing my position on call with the police department was a treatment center. And about a year into the job, the CEO called me and said, will you come train our clinicians? I said, how many are there? 50. Now I'm a few years sober and he's asking me to train 50 clinicians. And I remember thinking, on what? Because in my mind, you're a clinician. And if you're a trainer of clinicians, you're like a supercharged head clinician. Why was he wanting me to train his clinicians? And he said, on why you're engaging so many people in the ER. And that was the fourth message. And I was like, wow. I remember saying to him kind of fresh, can I just call it I fucking love them? I really think I said that to him. I might have said freaking, but I ran a workshop for those clinicians that was probably just okay, but it was me from my heart saying, well, I met them where they're at. Like, I thought it was obvious. So that was my very first training. That was before tipping point recovery even started. The fifth memo of all is the one that absolutely was the tipping point to getting tipping point recovery founded. Now, remember, in these 2 years on this ER position, I'm getting these messages, and and it's so clear to me that something's not right, but I was still in this complaining stage about all of it. I can't believe that the doctors don't understand addiction. I can't believe, like, I was in this constant complaining stage. This fifth memo, this fifth pathway that was being opened up was I met a chief medical officer of the behavioral health unit at an insurance company in Massachusetts. She gave a talk. And she shared a personal story of quite graphic about her younger self. And I went up to her at the end because I had never heard a medical doctor sharing their personal story. And I was sharing my personal story, and it, to me, was so impactful when people did that. Impactful in the sense of connecting with others and helping them. So I went up to her after to just tell her how impressed I was. And then I told her what I was doing. And she said, why don't you come visit me at work? And so I went in and I started telling her the outcomes of this program in the ER. And she said, why don't you come with me? Let's go into this office and get so-and-so. This was in 2016. And I remember we went into 5 offices. She just kept picking up people. And she said, let's go get this one. Let's go get this one. Next thing you know, there's 8 of us in a room. And we were talking about the outcomes of the work I was doing. And I'm an entrepreneur, right? I saw what was happening. They were talking with me about potentially doing a pilot project for 100 of their highest utilizing members. So what does that mean? Highest utilizing member in insurance is a person that's spending a lot of money because they can't get sober, and they're spinning in and out and in and out and in and out, right? And part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of the reason they're spinning in and out of treatment is because they keep going home, because people at home let them come home because they love them. But home is not at the table, learning about recovery, huge breakdown. And when I was working with them, they were staying in treatment longer, and they weren't relapsing, or if they were short relapses. And the insurance company was doing smart business. They were like, we should talk about this. And I remember sitting there going, whoa. It was definitely a tipping point for me. I felt like everywhere I turned, or not everywhere I turned, a handful of places I turned in this 4-year period, there were these roads that were lighting up. Is this making sense to you guys? These roads that were lighting up that I was like, so the doctors don't understand addiction. The treatment center wants me, newly, a few years sober, to train as clinicians. So something's missing there. Those patients, by the way, where I was training those clinicians, those patients were already in treatment. I remember thinking, they want me to teach the clinicians how to keep people in treatment. They're already in treatment, but they're leaving at a very high rate. So they're not really engaged. They're just physically there in their body. I was like, oh, do you follow? Are you following me here? I incorporated tipping point recovery in 2017. We didn't really start. I think in 2018, we had a little bit of services. 2019, 2020 was really the year that all of our programs began, or a number of them began, our group programs over Zoom, because I was terrified. And here's the analogy that I want to create for you. I was massively afraid to step into what I felt my higher power was showing me. I felt like this was God, if you believe in God, universe, if universe is a source that you believe in, whatever your higher power is, I felt the universe was clearly directing me. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in these systems. I'm in the trenches, but I'm seeing things that I couldn't unsee, right? I was terrified, but I started the company anyway. Was I qualified? I didn't feel like I was qualified. I was qualified to give a message, which is like, this is a mess, but I didn't know what I was going to build. I didn't know I mean, I knew the basic principles that we have today because I was talking about them and I was teaching people. I knew that when families learned about addiction that they could change the way they were responding, but I didn't show up in the way I show up today at all. Was I insecure? Big time. You look at some of my early videos. I just heard a recording of myself today and I kept stopping and starting. I wasn't even, there was no flow to how I put things together. And so, what I want to tell you, here's the huge aha for me. You're in the same position. When you find me now, you feel the same way I felt back then. You feel afraid. You feel qualified. Do you feel qualified to do what I'm teaching you to do? Not initially. Do you feel insecure about doing it? Yes. But you show up anyway because I showed up anyway. I did it scared. I hired a coach. I hired a mentor and they told me to go on video. So I went on video. And guys, those are horrible to look at for me. My ego, at least, is like, oh my God, you weren't making any sense. And it took a while. It wasn't fast, but I was, as Tom Brady says, I was consistent, I was determined, and I was willing to chop the wood and carry the water. Consistent, determined, and willing to do the work. When I was writing my book last year and the year before, because it was a good year before it came out, I used the book to write the book. I used the framework. This framework has completely changed my life. Does this make sense? And I want you to know that if you're pulled into this work that we're doing here, you're the warrior in your family. Because I couldn't ignore Cam's saying, I'm grateful you listened to the signs. Me too. They were so loud and so clear. I'm telling you, for a good couple of years, from probably 2016 to 2018, I marinated on this and just complained about the industry. And I remember calling people, why aren't people teaching families? Why is no one doing this? And then I used to say, is this okay that I'm doing this? Is it okay that I'm teaching families from behind the curtain? I kind of felt like I was doing something wrong. And I got more and more validated. I found the people who are my people. I found my teachers. I found my mentors. I kept growing myself. I kept strengthening on the inside. And then I'd teach you and you would change and your loved one would change. And then I'd see it happen. And it was you getting better that fed me to do more. And then I realized I'd be talking to people and I'd say, I think I just designed a worksheet. Because when I gave someone a 3-step thing, there was a worksheet. So I hired someone to help me take my trainings, take my words and turn it into a worksheet and then a workbook and then a whole program. I didn't even know what the program should be called. I didn't know what all the lessons were. Built it from scratch because I listened. Because I listened to the inner voice, those 5 memos, those 5 messages. That's how Tipping Point Recovery started. That's how I got into the field, because I became an addict first. I was told by something in me, just help others. And I just showed up and I paid attention. And I truly believe we all have these little whispers and messages. Are you paying attention? We need an army over the next 5 years at Tipping Point Recovery. How did I get to trust? How did I get my trust again by my family? By showing up every day and teaching other families. My family was watching. And if you're a person in recovery and your family doesn't trust you now, come into my Facebook group and buy my book. And that will help you. So, because all these stories I just described about these jobs early in recovery, I took everything I learned from all those years and I put it into this program. Blood, sweat, and tears into this program. Such a labor of love. So how did I get into this? I saw it was needed. I cared about doing it more than my fear of it. So get the fire. Thank you, Red Heart. Get the fire in you for something that can become stronger than your fear. I cared about doing this more than my fear of it. That meeting with the insurance company was the tipping point. Because I remember thinking, and again, it took 2 more years to incorporate after that meeting, or at least a year and a half. It was a lot of conversation with mentors, a lot of soul searching. And I used to, this is the narrative. I used to say, who the hell am I to do this? And I believed, who the hell am I to do this? And that who the hell am I to do this turned into, who am I not to do this? How dare I know this and not show up to people to give it? So I want to say the same to you. Who are you not to recover your family? I found teachers to guide me. We need teachers. I talked about it to everyone I could. I prayed. I got super present. And I just said, okay, I need to strengthen from the inside out in order to do this, because it was very clear on the outside these messages were being delivered to me. I couldn't ignore it. I grew into what was being asked of me. I healed while I was helping you heal. You don't have to be that much further ahead than the person you're helping. You just have to have commitment, tenacity, show up, keep showing up, because this shaped itself. Thank you, Real. A lot of people say to me, thank you so much for doing what you do. You've saved my life. And I'm like, you saved my life. You gave me purpose. I don't know that y'all realize how co-created this all is. Maybe you're picking it up now as I'm sharing it. This shaped itself. And while the creation of this is done, the book is done, the first book, the program is solidified, the long-term program and the 12-week curriculum is nailed. And now we have an introductory way for families to come into our program that works. It's going to continue to be iterated. It's going to continue to be co-created. Insurance will want to cover this one day. It's not now, because that's a way bigger climb. And what I realized is what I'm trying to pull off is way bigger than anything I can even conceptualize in terms of its potential impact. And so we're in the position in this next couple of years to be looking at how this can expand across the nation in a much bigger way to help more. So if you're called here, you have a seat at the table, because together we can do a whole lot more. Malcolm Gladwell wrote the book, The Tipping Point. Do you know that? You know the term tipping point. I didn't create it. Malcolm Gladwell did. He said, emotions are contagious. Addiction's contagious. Recovery is contagious. So if you feel fire in listening to me, you're welcome. And if you're following me and you're saying, I love this, then it's tapping something in you. Then you're at the table. You're in this little pod. So hang with us. Malcolm Gladwell says the tipping point is that magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior crosses a threshold, it tips and it spreads. So I called the company Tipping Point Recovery because I just want to take one person in the family and I want to get you so recovered, so sober from the effects of addiction that no one wants to hang around you using. That people around you will be motivated to change. I want you to stop co-signing the drama of the addiction. I want you to be unwaveringly committed to recovery for your loved one. That's what a tipping point is. It's a moment when an idea spreads like wildfire. There will be a tipping point for tipping point recovery, hopefully, in the world one day where everybody knows about what it is, right? But in the meantime, it's designed to drop a rock into your family system. And if you're following me, a lot of you tell me when you first find me, I want to come in, I want to buy your training, I want to join your boot camp, but you're afraid. Do you remember in this story how afraid I told you I was? And it took me 2 years and I almost didn't do this? What if I almost didn't do it? What if I didn't do it? So do you see the parallel? My parallel journey to building this is the same as what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to, if something's lighting up in you, a little bit of fire, I'm asking you to feed that and watch something else that I did. Join Stop the Chaos. Come into our boot camp. Get the book. Buy 5 books and hand them out to people you know so you can start talking to other people so you can ripple that out around you. So a little bit longer of a story than a 2-minute one, but we're going to eventually distill this down so I can tell this story in 5 or 10 minutes. Why and how I started Tipping Point Recovery. So the summary is I got in the field because of my own addiction. I started the company because I couldn't not. Because I was paying attention to the messages, They were pretty loud. Are you paying attention? Oh, thanks, Daniil. I appreciate that. It I needed to be seen in these whole 7 or 8 years because I would have been way too scared to do this by myself. So I'm so glad that question's been asked of me multiple times lately. I wanted to answer it for you. That's why I started this. And it's bigger than me now, way bigger than me, not about me. It's bigger than you. And it's just pulling us along. And we're just going to keep doing the next right thing because we're going to fight for the person that can't fight for themselves yet. Because we're going to keep showing up for the people that can't show up for themselves yet. And is it a guarantee that they'll get there and have and thrive? No, because we can't guarantee addiction. But what's sure as hell a guarantee is that we don't have to go down with it. And we're not showing up right for our loved ones, but we can. We can believe in them. We can show up more strong. We can learn all the ways that we're complicit, and we can do things differently. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys later. Let me know what you think.